Hello and welcome to another edition of our webcast series, VFX Pros Home Edition, delivering exclusive interviews and dynamic content amidst these unprecedented times. VFX Pros Home Edition is your channel for VFX stories behind the scenes, live conversations about cutting-edge technologies and techniques, discussions around the VES 70 most influential visual effects films, and more. We're delighted you're joining us for today's interactive discussion on retooling your career with 3 seasoned recruiting professionals. We'll begin in just a minute. I'm Naomi Goldman, VES Communications Director. As your moderator, let me share just a few housekeeping details. The webcast will run a little over an hour. It is being recorded and it'll be available later on the VES website and our social media channels, and we'll post the details at the end of the session. If you're following on Zoom and would like to ask any of our panelists a question, go to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, click Q&A and type in your question. If you're on Facebook Live, enter your question as a comment. We can't promise we'll get to all of them, but we will do our very best. So let me tell you a little bit about our guests and we'll get started. Joining us, we have ILM recruitment consultant Lara Hopkins, whose experience spans 4 continents, and she's joining us today from Sydney. We have VES board member and recruiter for BLT Recruiting, Thurmond O'Neal, and we are hoping to be joined by our 3rd panelist in just a few minutes, which is Camille Eden, who's another VES board member and vice president of animation recruitment at Nickelodeon. Hello, ladies.
Hi, Naomi.
Hi. So let me set the stage for just a minute. I think we can all agree in that, the only thing certain is change. And the world of visual effects has always been dynamic, and getting good advice for breaking into the industry and advancing your career and being successful has always been valuable. But now, in the last couple months amidst COVID-19, there are also some new factors and best practices and words of wisdom when it comes to things like, refreshing your image and, putting forth your best self in this new virtual world and things like that. So we want to kind of delve in and share some information, both for people looking to enter the visual effects industry, but also people who are refreshing and transitioning, and making some changes as they go through their journey. So I'm going to kind of jump in and, start with you, Susan. If we think kind of from a linear perspective on preparing for your best job search, and someone wants to start by, I want to refresh my image and gather up all of my tools that I want to submit, to showcase my hard skills, my CV, my resume, my reels. What are some tips and best practices that you want people to keep in mind for getting to that top of the pile and standing out in the search?
Thanks for the question. That's an excellent question. I think that it really starts with making sure that you present yourself exactly as you are, exactly who you are. And so if you are a lighter, maybe you don't present yourself as anything else. You kind of, I think there's 2 things to do. You can set yourself up to reflect what you've been doing. And maybe you want to move into compositing away from lighting, then you can sort of hint at that. I think, but clarity in your resume, having a nice, well-presented reel with some indication via breakdown or whatever of what you've done on that reel. Also with regard to the reel, I think it's really important to note that your best work should be first, and hopefully it's also your most recent work. So it's just, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. And often that first impression is your reel, your resume, and maybe even your LinkedIn profile.
Got it. So, hi, Camille. Good afternoon. Nice to see you.
Hello.
So, as we were just talking about, as people are thinking about starting their search, wherever they are on their journey, what are some things that you would suggest to people as they're thinking of refreshing their image and gathering, that first part of let me gather my tools, my resume, my CV, my reel, what's going to get me to stand out, and what are some pitfalls that I should avoid?
Yeah, I think some of the things that help people stand out, and I think are really focusing on the job. And I don't know if this was brought up before, but it's really tailoring to the job description at hand. I can't express enough how important that is. That's one of the things that's really important, because that's going to help people rise up to the search. And it's okay to have different skill sets, but just make sure that it's really focused and tailored to the job. And the pitfall is again, not understanding. I think in the industry, there are a lot of people who are generalists. So you want to put all of your work on your resume or on your reel, which is okay. But if you can organize it in a way so that if it's, a character TD position, and maybe you also do pipeline TD work, but the job is asking for character TD, put that first and put all the skills that relate to that first. Then you can add the supplemental roles like pipeline TD or animator or layout on the job. So I think it's really important to tailor it.
Can I just tell a little story about exactly that, Camille? I agree totally, and that is the first thing that I also wanted to say. Insofar as even having multiple versions of your resume, so when you're submitting to a specific job, you are actually submitting a resume that addresses exactly that job description, because I do find at the moment that a lot of people are applying for a lot of jobs. Of course, it's a difficult time in the industry, but I'm often looking at resumes, and it's pretty clear that in a resume or a cover letter, which I don't know about both of you, but I actually love a cover letter. So that's just one other thing. We can maybe talk a bit more about that later. But I'm finding that it's pretty clear that people aren't really reading the job description. And when you're having a lot of resumes and a lot of reels, you really do want your supervisors to be able to look at something. They are going to be saying, well, they haven't listed this, this, and this, so they're not suitable. The other day I had a resume come in for a particular role, and the resume said director. And it was for a technician role, a stagecraft role. And I actually rang him, because looking at his resume, I could see that he'd done what we needed for this role, but he'd really, understandably, was very proud of his directing work, but it really was a small part of what he actually could do. So I talked him through it, and then he's resubmitted his resume. The tone was correct for the role, and we'll see how it goes. But, it was just a sort of an example of how tailoring your resume can give a completely different impression and really improve your chances of getting through to the interview, which is what everybody should be aiming for.
I totally agree. And I also think, everybody really has to, I don't know if there's a studio now that doesn't have you apply online. And, your resume goes through a parser when you apply. And a trick I always tell people is, really read the job description, because it's like a test, and the job description pretty much has all the answers of what we're looking for as a company or a role, and what recruiters are. And so when you apply online, that tool, whatever your applicant tracking or CRM, is going to be looking for matches. And it's not that you should fabricate the information, but if you read a job description and you realize, like, I can do those skills, and then you put it back in your words, but match those skills that we're asking for, but don't apply for something that you don't have the skills, because you're not gonna qualify, and you will probably, it'll parse your job or your resume, but it won't be seen because you're not matching the skills. So that's why it's really important. And then when we see it as recruiters or hiring managers, we know, and then you have descriptions, that just helps us do our job, because we're here for you.
No, and you raise a good question. So in terms of what kind of steps does it take for a resume to get to one of you, in terms of automated systems before a human is actually going through and cherry picking their favorites, out of a stack of incomings that they might receive?
I can speak to that, but not really, because I'm a for-hire recruiter. I'm always targeting people. I'm not putting up a job and having people apply. So it's a little bit different for me. I'm not using an ATS. I am the human that goes through everybody's resume and reel and LinkedIn to make sure that the keywords are there and it looks like the right companies and the right roles are there before I reach out to someone. So I think that just, being, there are some really nice websites that will give you some tips and tricks for how to leverage your specific experience and use the keywords, as Camille and Lara have both said, that are in the job descriptions so that you can get through the ATS and get to a human, because that's what you ultimately want to have happen.
Often, getting to the right person, people are looking for the pathways. There's here's where the job is posted and sort of the protocol and the HR pipeline versus people looking for, hey, I know somebody at that company. Might it make a difference if I get it to them and they physically put it in your hands? So how much does all of that matter in terms of how the person's resume gets to you, or their reel, or like an internal kind of direct recommendation? I'll say that to any of you.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point that obviously internal recommendations are much appreciated and always noted, but it always goes hand in hand usually with a application online. There's been lots of times where I've had an internal recommendation and a resume, but I have then contacted that person and asked them to physically apply, because you kind of want them in the system. So it's not that there's any guarantees if you go through, a contact that you'll get through. But I do think that those personal connections and work connections are really valuable in this industry. It's always something that we love to hear, is when there's a recommendation of somebody for a role.
I would totally agree in that. I think we love recommendations because, in all of the companies I've looked for, one of the best resources I've had are the people working in the job, and they have their networks. So I think it's really great to get referrals, internal referrals. I like to add those in. I like, for inclusive hiring, I like to have a mix of referrals as well as people who have come through and, going to, that's why we all go to events or, get lists or work with organizations to make sure that our talent pools are really diversified. And I think that you get a lot of different perspectives too from your internal people, and I think, again, I think they can really speak to the job. And then as far as, again, I go back to, I think it's great to get those, but what I will have people do is actually go through and apply through our site, like a company site. And even if it's not my company, I'll refer to people. And I know maybe for Susan, like maybe you do sources, because a lot of companies actually have sourcers who are looking for people as well. And so, we'll get some internal people, and then we'll have our sourcer reach out to those people and then vet their skills. So I think it works on multiple levels.
Yeah, and and to be honest, we do have an ATS. It's where we keep track of our candidates and past contact information and where people have applied for jobs and whether or not they interviewed and any kind of behind the resume feedback that we may get. But to your point, Naomi, leveraging your network is a huge part of connecting, refreshing your position, finding a new job, finding any job, just making sure that people can vet for you as a human being with your teamwork skills and the soft skills that make a really good artist or producer or whatever. That can go a very long way, but yes, you do have to do that bit of housekeeping where you bring someone into your system so you don't lose them.
In some industries, we kind of say, like, by the time you see a job posted on that website or that place, you're already 10 steps behind because, people who had an in might have gotten there first. So is that sort of like fact, myth, misinformation that by the time you see something posted, you're already, behind the 8 ball?
I don't think you are. Not from the perspective of ILM and other companies as well that I've worked for. Often you're looking for multiple people. And I think the job ads are a good way of getting your way in. It certainly doesn't mean that that role is being filled. There might be some very senior roles where it's probably slightly smaller pool of candidates, but I think for most artist roles and production roles, it's absolutely the way to apply.
Now, I know many of us have seen resumes that have red flags or things that come in, and I know, Susan, I don't know if you want to kind of mention a couple really good kind of button down professional housekeeping things people should keep in mind when they're turning things in terms of their emails and other things.
I think it's always smart to brand yourself as the person that you feel like you are. And it's okay to be playful, but you have to really try to avoid being juvenile. Unless there's some, your email address is help me Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only help at gmail.com or something like that. That might go well, but your university prank mentality, people really don't want to see that in a professional environment. So, I work a lot with people who work in advertising, and the preference on the ad side of things is for you to have, as an artist, a website that is branded with your brand. That could be your first name, last name, 3D.com, or something that shows what your skills are, painter, or I've even seen, I don't know, Pixel Lover, which sounds a little provocative, but it's just something that's catchy that helps you brand. And then you contain that brand all the way through. That's your resume is there, your email address is on that domain name. I think just it's okay to be playful, because this is a playful business, but try to keep it professional.
And then, and also everyone lives their lives, or a lot of people live their lives on social media. And I know that, I'm sure we've all been in a position to kind of give advice, whether it's people later in the career or younger ones, looking to kind of break into career and being sort of mindful of what is out there sort of in the public, sphere about them. And I'm just wondering if any of you have any thoughts on, when you take a look at people's social media kind of brands and reputations and images, and where that might play into the process.
I always recommend that people keep a separate professional, separate professional social media profiles. There's a lot of choices out there right now. LinkedIn is great. And if you have Facebook, you might want to have a personal Facebook and a professional Facebook. Instagram is the same. I've had situations where, I've gone in to look at someone's work on their site, and I don't really need to know about their breakup with their boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. I just really want to focus on the work at hand. So I think it's important, especially if you're using it for job seeking, you really need to stick to keeping it focused on the work. Yeah.
I also think LinkedIn is really my main place to be looking at people. And I think this sounds like a small thing, but I think the LinkedIn photo is pretty key. Yes. I think a lot of people are blurring between Instagram or Facebook and LinkedIn. I think that the headshot should be something that you're happy for prospective employers to see. So, I see a reasonable amount of people in a pretty casual setting in a bar or on holiday or with their dogs or whatever. And I do think that actually having a reasonably decent headshot is really worth it. I look at every single person's LinkedIn profile when they apply, and having that up to date, looking professional, I think is a really good thing. I don't often look at people's personal Facebook. I rarely look at that. I love looking at artists' work on Instagram, particularly if they're, have some professional work on there or photography work. But LinkedIn, it really needs to be really buttoned up. I think it's a really good way to approach it.
I have a dirty secret to share with all of you. I keep a folder on my desktop of really absurd LinkedIn pictures. I think there's a picture of a guy with his child in a hot dog bun. There are about a dozen pictures of people doing selfies in the car with the seatbelt. There's the wedding picture where the wife or the spouse has been cut out. So that's just something that you can't share that with anyone because it feels too much like shaming, but it gives me a chuckle now and again, how people would like to see themselves presented professionally. So
one other thing I want to ask in terms of how people are presenting themselves, there's a balance between I want to show you that I am a specialist, in this area, but then again, I want to also show you that I'm versatile and can do a couple things. So I'm sure there are people who brand themselves as a multi-hyphenate. And I want you to talk about how that is both helpful and challenging in looking at somebody applying for a position, if you can.
I think that it's, again, I go back to my previous answer in that, again, you have a lot of people, especially in visual effects and animation, the line has kind of been blurred. Before there was a really hard line in specialties, and now I think a lot of disciplines can cross over into games, into visual effects, into animation, TV. And so I think it's important, again, if you have multiple skill sets, it's a plus. And there's different ways you can highlight that. Like a website is fantastic for being able to have all of your skills in one place. But when you send out your work, you want to have your reel for a specific discipline. And I think, it's okay to showcase your other skills. It makes you more marketable. And it's not a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it helps, but it's that focus. We called it focus versatility. Stay focused, but also be able to show your versatile skills, because that's just going to make you more marketable, especially in a smaller place where you might have you might have to do other jobs.
And on that point of, again, showcasing versatility, I just want to talk a little bit about transferable skills and crossover. We have people on the line who might also be, aspiring visual effects artists who are looking to kind of prepare themselves for the field and talk about some of their work in other industries and how that carries over. So I'm just wondering, if there's anything you can share about how you also look at transferable skills and experience as, for someone who wants to move into this industry. I guess I could start with you on that, Lara, if that kind of comes into your thinking.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that sort of is something I did want to refer to as soft skills, which is, a bit of an odd term, but, the kind of skills that you use to work collaboratively in a team, understanding how workplace works, understanding how to work well with people, problem solving, all those sorts of things are the sorts of things that I think now more than ever, particularly in this time of working remotely, are incredibly important for people's skill sets to have, as well as the artistic and technical skills that you need. So people who are transferring from other types of jobs probably already have those types of skills. That means that if they're coming into a workplace where they're perhaps new on the artistic or technical front, they do actually have those soft skills that will help them sort of operate successfully in a professional way within a working environment.
And Camille, have you had that experience where you're looking to kind of find a fit, from someone who maybe has crossed over from a different sector?
Absolutely. I mean, again, it's, I like that because I think it layers in experience. And I actually like to read between the lines when I see an interesting resume or I see someone's background. I'm looking at exactly what Lara said, is like, I'm looking at the skills that somebody has, like their hard skills, the tools they've used, but it's again, I'm looking at the soft skills, sometimes even diving down into, like, have they volunteered somewhere? What do they do in their off time? And a lot of people think that they shouldn't put their some of those skills on their resume. I personally like seeing them and having them, because most of us work in team environments, and you have to work alongside other people. And it's important to get a glimpse of you. Your resume is there to represent you when you're not in the room. So you want to give as much of yourself in that, your whole person. So that's your hard skills, your soft skills. And then I just wanted to throw out, for people who might be transitioning from one role to another, in my opinion, that's what I like to use an objective for, because I think, again, you have to tell us what you want to do. You're applying for the position, and sometimes you need to help guide us with what it is that you are looking for in your next role.
So let's say for a minute, okay, the resume has made it through, right? You've made it through whatever cut it needs to be made through, and you've gotten to the point where you want to interview somebody, excuse me, off of their resume. So I want to talk a little bit about, let's call it hacks and best practices for interviews. A lot of times we've had that phrase, right? Someone looks good on paper, and there's a lot of things that kind of come up with that chemistry check. How does someone fit the team culture? Kind of what's their dynamic? So let me start with you, Susan. Kind of what are some kind of both kind of tips and suggestions you have for interviews, and how's that changed, or what new things do people have to think about in this Zoom universe right now, where you don't really get to be in the room with somebody? How does that change sort of your guidance?
I think that, so the first thing you do when you find out you've got the interview is you make sure that you research the company that you're going to work for. If you know something about the project, I think that's also a plus. You take a look at who you might know within the company, so that you can make sure you have some advocates when you walk in the door, and a friendly face to say hello to and high five or whatever. Of course, that's, presuming we'll ever go. I know we'll go in person again. I know it's going to happen, but it feels really surreal to think now about seeing people I don't know. But anyway, how things have changed with regard to the pandemic. There's a fair amount of Zoom and FaceTime and Google Hangouts videos. A lot of times people will do a phone screen first, maybe with a hiring manager, and then the video chat will be left for the direct report or the supervisor for the project or something like that. And I tell my candidates to prepare by, again, research, eye contact, make sure you have 2 or 3 really good questions to ask about either the day-to-day of the role, the size of the team, what does success look like. I think that's really important. And then at the end of the day, you just have to make sure you say thank you, and in some meaningful way. An email is lovely. Make sure it's well written, and make sure it's not a group email to a bunch of people. Send it to the individuals, and make sure that in your thank you note you put something like, oh, I really enjoyed how you worked on project blah blah blah. That was one of my very favorites, and it was interesting to hear your story about just to show that you were present, paying attention, and that you want the role.
So Susan, remind people, even if it seems really obvious, how to show up on Zoom and, again, present your best professional self.
Well, I think lighting is important. Making eye contact with the camera, even though it looks weird because you want to look at yourself over there. Making sure that your framing is correct. No distractions. Soft lighting from the front. Turn off everything. Before we did this chat, I realized I was getting FaceTimes and messages and Facebook messages and all this stuff on my phone. So I just kind of shut everything down so that you can focus. And don't do something you wouldn't do in a real meeting. Don't look at your phone. Don't, unless that's part of it. You say, oh, I need to research this thing, and you pull up this thing and say, oh yeah, here's the person we have in common. Just try to stay present and make sure you don't have anything in your teeth, and just basics like that.
And just like everything else, look at how you're dressed and look at what's the backdrop behind you, unless it's part of your pitch, right?
Oh gosh, yeah. And what a great opportunity with all the virtual backgrounds in Zoom for an artist to really show off their creativity. It's you can't do that in person unless you bring a big screen and wheel it in a conference room or something like that.
Got it. So Lara, what's your best guidance of how people can answer that always trick question of what are your biggest weaknesses?
Yeah, that's a classic question. I ask it sometimes, not always. I think being honest is really key. I think self-awareness of areas that you'd like to improve on is sometimes the biggest strength that people will see. On the flip side, if in an interview there's a candidate who quite honestly is basically saying that they're the best at everything and there's absolutely nothing that they could improve on, it doesn't come across that well. So I think being prepared for that question is good. And often that kind of taps into either a technical area that you'd like to improve on or you'd like to expand into, or even referring to the soft skills. I was talking to someone the other day who was telling me about how he felt that during this time of working from home, that the experience of supervising artists was really beneficial because it's really honed in his communication skills and making sure that he's explaining what he wants very clearly. And it was a really nice thing to hear that as a supervisor, he had really recognized that there was an area that maybe he was lacking in before, but he had developed some extra skills during this time to address that. And that kind of honesty about areas that you'd like to improve, because let's face it, I don't think any of us are perfect, can actually be a really good gateway to be showing somebody that you are a really, honest and present team member.
Thank you. Camille, are there certain go-to questions that you really ask everybody that are good reminders for people of how they should kind of be prepared for the conversation?
Yeah, I like to find out if people have done their research, and there's a couple of different ways to ask that. Is like, tell us your favorite thing about this company, and you'd be surprised at how many people, there's some people who are really well prepared and down to, they've researched me and the other interviewers in the room. It's not that you have to go to that level, but you should definitely know the company or the culture at least, because you could be asked those questions during the interview. So I always like to ask about the company and the culture. And then, other things that I want to know is I'm going to always ask key questions. Again, I might dive into a little bit more of the personal, not their personal life per se, but, how they deal with certain situations. And then again, I go back to those soft skills. So, what are things that you do outside of work? Because that's going to be really telling for me. Again, is that person a team player? Do they show a lot of empathy outside of the job? And I might tailor some of these questions just, again, based on the role. But I think for me, the most important is really doing the research and being prepared, because that's going to tell me a lot. And I will add one more trick in there that I do is after the interview, I usually go back, and we can't do that now because we're in this virtual world, but when we're on site, I actually will go back and I'll ask my coordinator or assistant, I'll ask the people at the front desk, how did this person show up? Because sometimes they'll even come back and say, well, that person, when they came in, they were so rude. So you have to remember, if you're on site, or even if you have people assisting you now that we're in this virtual world, just be nice, because that can, go against you in the process. And there have been people who might have shown up and done great, but all the people that they talked to along the way before they got in the room had something else to say.
No, I think that's an excellent point. There's a lot we talk to people about being, how they are with an assistant or a receptionist or someone, serving them at a restaurant or something else, has a lot to say about their interaction with people. So that's a really good point. I do want to talk a little bit a little more about the impact of COVID-19 and kind of this large subject of where we are with a lot of virtual and remote things going on. So I think the first question, and I'm going to start with you, Lara, is, I mean, number one, has this era that we're a part of right now kind of changed what you're looking for in terms of people working remotely from anywhere across the globe versus where I really want them to be geographically located, kind of close to, you know, the site, the company? And how have the travel complications kind of impacted your work, since you are, you know, covering, you know, international in terms of your scope?
Yeah, how long have we got? It's the most unusual. After so many years of hiring, this is a really unprecedented time, obviously. In Australia, we have closed borders. So we actually, at the moment, nobody can come in unless they're an Australian citizen, which for the moment somewhat, you know, narrows our hiring pool. That will of course change, and as time goes on, we're monitoring that very closely. There's there's, you know, potential to get some travel exemptions, and I'm sure as life goes on over time, things will certainly change on that front. But I think it is true globally that and I've been thinking a lot about this, that the visual effects industry that has relied for many years now on many artists traveling the world to different companies and countries to work, I think things could take a while to resume to that kind of normalcy where, you know, obviously many countries, including the States, have very strict visa restrictions. So you've got a very complicated set of arrangements that are out of our control that will, you know, affect who we're looking at and who we can actually physically hire. One thing I did want to mention about resumes that we didn't touch on is that at the moment, one of the first things I'm looking for is people's citizenship. And I think probably every studio will be the same. It is important to list what your citizenship is. It makes it much easier to actually really get your head around how and where it's most logical for you to potentially be able to work. In terms of remote working, we've been working from home here in Sydney. All of our ILM studios have been working from home for the last 8, 9, 10 weeks. It feels like 10 years. It's, you know, not that long. It's working really well. It's absolutely amazing the way our technology teams turned our workforce into working from home in just incredibly fast amount of time. And on the whole, it's been incredibly successful, and I can hardly really pinch myself that, you know, that this could happen, something that we did wonder about for a long time. How well people have adapted, how the tools have supported the workers, and it's been fantastic. Now, it remains to be seen whether this is going to affect how we build our teams moving forward. Working from home has been brilliant, but there's no doubt that there's some creative and team building factors that are missing that you don't get when you're at home on a Zoom or, you know, on a video call. So I suspect that moving forward, there will still have to be a blend. Whether we go back full time into the studio, when that happens, we're working on that constantly. But I do think that I don't imagine there'll be a world straight away where we have a workforce that's not getting some kind of face-to-face interaction during the week, but we'll see.
Thank you. You know, and Camille, I would ask sort of a slightly, you know, a related question is, you know, a lot of times when people are choosing the place they want to work, a part of it is, I want to be part of that workplace culture, you know, that team dynamic, you know, that thing, you know, that brand, that ethos. And so in this virtual world, how do you kind of describe or kind of sell, let's say, the Nickelodeon culture or dynamic as we're physically distanced and people cannot experience what it's like to physically be under that hub together?
It's a great question. And, you know, I echo what Lara said in that it was pretty amazing how quickly the teams at Nickelodeon were able to shift, you know, in such a short amount of time to get us working remotely. Like there was barely a blip in any of the shows. And so, you know, first it was like, let's see if we can do this and work from home. And the focus was on the show. But what we also started to take a look at was, you know, how do we recreate the culture of the studio when we're not all together? So, you know, it's, you know, pulling people together and listening to what, you know, what other people in the company would like to have in lieu of being able to meet up. So it's, you know, what I think is, you know, this whole pandemic has been such a disruptor, but it's also brought up new creative ways for us to connect. You know, just this panel that we're doing right now is one of those ways. And so at the studio, we found ways to, you know, how do we recreate and share the experiences, but you know, doing so virtually. So, you know, regular meetups, events that, you know, we couldn't do before, you know, bringing in a live DJ, you know, well, not live, but yes. But, you know, it's like different things like that, you know, just water cooler moments. And I think they've done a really great job. So it's kind of forced us to recreate that experience, because I think, you know, just our makeup, you know, we need others, you know, we thrive on that, and in our workplace. And I think once the shift was off, okay, we can do this, you know, it was quickly, let's pivot to how do we stay connected and how do we keep that culture going? And even in recruiting, we've looked at ways in how we bring that into the onboarding experience, you know, whereas before we would have, you know, a monthly breakfast. Now we do a monthly call, and, you know, everybody brings their cup of coffee, and it's just, everybody gets to meet each other. And some of the people we've hired have never set foot in the building, but we want to bring that to them so that they get that sense and that feeling of this is what it's like, and these are the people. So I think there's a lot of creativity that's come out of, you know, this pandemic.
Got it. Now, and let me ask you, Susan, are there any sort of expectations you have about how an applicant should prepare to be completely ready to work from home? And is that something that comes up in the conversation with potential applicants?
Yes, it does. And I think that each studio has its own protocols. I think that there's a couple of common sense things you can do. One is make sure that you have a good size monitor, an ergonomic chair, a nice size desk. If you're working on a project with some confidentiality issues, you might be asked to sign an NDA. Your family might be asked to sign an NDA. You might be asked to make sure that you're always in a room with your monitor away from the back of the door so nobody can walk by and see what's on your monitor. And then I know a lot of folks are using various ways. There's Teradici and lots of other ways where you log into the company's server to access the pipeline, the tools, render capabilities and whatnot. So basically your monitor is just meant to be a way for you to view the work that you're doing. And it's kind of like you're on site, but you're in your room where hopefully no one's looking over your shoulder and leaking that next blockbuster movie onto social media or something like that.
Got it. Let me ask you, you all, a couple really very specific questions that are kind of coming in from participants. And some of them are just very specific to the application process. So question one is, hold on. Question one is, would you recommend a cover letter when it's not explicitly required on the application system? And what do you think if candidates resubmit the same resume and cover letter if they're kind of reapplying for, you know, the same position or something else, you know, where the same eyes are going to view it?
Oh, Lara, do you want to go?
There you go.
I use the cover letter, and again, it's personal depending on the hiring manager or the recruiter. My first stop is always the resume. For me, the cover letter is backup, and I always like to look at it if there are more questions that I have about, like if I'm not seeing on the resume those soft skills, then I might look at the cover letter as a backup. My hope is that you put everything on the resume first of all. So that's what I like to go to. To your second question, I think that I would prefer, like, again, with these systems as they go, once you apply for the position, and if you're applying for the same position, if it's a short amount of time, you don't really need to send a second resume unless it's been a while or you have had another job or assignment in between and you just want to send updated material. Or if you're applying for a different job, then you should tailor your resume for the new job.
Got it. So Lara, let me throw two questions at you. They're sort of related. We have some folks saying that, they've gotten really good feedback on their reel and their resumes, and they keep getting good feedback, but they can't seem to get from the application, phase to the interview stage. And they're not, no one's been giving them any sort of really constructive criticism or feedback. So I know this may be a case by case question, but is there anything, generally in terms of what people can do to have their work stand out more, or she's saying appear more employable and kind of get past that hurdle?
Yeah, I must admit I'm probably over emotional, but I my heart goes out to people that feel like they're continuously applying and not getting there. And all I can say is keep trying. A lot of it is timing. If you're presenting yourself with all the tips that you've heard already through this webinar, you're making sure that your LinkedIn's up to date, your photo's good. Keep trying, keep making connections, and just keep trying. I mean, I've spoken to people over many years, sometimes before a role has come up, that's come up at the right time with the right hiring managers with the right skills, and you'll get there. But it can take time, and a lot of it is timing. How many roles do we have? Who's hiring? How is it going to work out? I know it's tough, and I'm sorry if that's not a very it's the golden answer. I don't know if it's quite as good as you'd like to hear.
No, I appreciate that. And since you were talking about some of the international and travel considerations, I mean, there were a few more questions, such as, so if everyone can work from home now for the foreseeable future, how much does actual geographic location and citizenship matter, if we are in this sort of virtual kind of remote space? And also how should people kind of bring up citizenship? We have a few people who asked about, if can I claim I'm allowed to work at a location when I'm on my student visa? Or I don't know if those are very, too specific of questions to ask you, but I at least think the first question of how much does citizenship matter when a lot of jobs can be done remotely?
Well, I can't speak for other companies, of course, but with ILM, ultimately right now, we are assuming that at some point we will be back working together in the office, even if it's not 5 days a week. We don't know, but we think that life will resume some normalcy. So when it comes to remote working, if somebody's working, somebody's home address is in a completely different geographical location on a different time zone, working in teams, it's quite difficult really to get that to work. So even if people start working remotely, which we have now, ultimately we are planning to have people back in the office in all of our studios. So it is important to know. I think we can't assume that the whole world has flipped into remote working quite yet.
Got it. Susan, I just want to ask you a little bit more about both education and on-the-job training, because again, we have definitely some folks tuning in who are looking to kind of break in to a, part of the industry or come from somewhere else. So we have a couple questions. For example, if I come from a motion graphics and advertising background, what are some of the ways I can best move towards, let's say, VFX and compositing if you haven't had, the VFX specific jobs on your reel? So let me start with that question.
Well, I think that whenever someone's looking to make a change into a slightly different vertical within our industry, you have to ask yourself three things. They are, what do you want to do, which is in this case compositing? What can you do, which is probably coming from a motion design background, some kind of understanding of After Effects and some other softwares that might have some compositing capabilities. And the third thing is, what are you willing to do to get there? So is that you go to school? Is that you do a piece on specs so you have something nice and juicy for your reel? Is that you take your favorite visual effects shot and deconstruct it and reconstruct it so that you can show it to a hiring manager to say, yes, I know my reel is primarily motion design, but look at this compositing work I did on my end, and that's my true passion, and that's where I want to go.
Got it. We're getting a lot of questions, so people are really, really engaged. Well, let me ask you, Susan, and then I'd love the others to answer. What's the best approach to getting constructive feedback after rejection, rather than simply generic appreciation for the interest? What can people take from that? And, what would be a good approach to dealing with those situations?
I'm so glad that came up, because I think it goes hand in hand with the specific question that you asked Lara about someone saying, hey, I've gotten some great feedback on my reel, but I'm not getting any traction. I think you have to hit up non-lay people and show them your work and show them, here's a reel for somebody who does what I hope to be hired to do, and here's my reel. And sometimes I think a friend might give you more straightforward feedback about pace or timing or music or the way the reel is edited than a hiring manager might. You've got to keep in mind that Lara and Camille and even me to a certain extent you're not really a recruiter unless you have about 1,500 tabs open in your browser and at least 300 unanswered emails. Some of them, just people checking in, even though you don't have much to tell them, and just keeping up with that is really, really hard. And stopping down to make an honest assessment about someone's work is something that we all would love to do, but we don't always have the time to do it. I think another thing to do would be to find a mentor and have that person kind of walk you through where you might focus your attentions, or perhaps some tools you could learn to sharpen your skills. I mean, we're always learning, right? We are human. As human beings, we're constantly learning and constantly adapting. And even the most senior creative people I know will dip their toe into something to learn something new. So leverage your network and try to get some honest feedback from people who maybe don't understand our industry. I think that's sometimes a good way to do that.
No, I appreciate that. And I also think, and I would say this now, a question for any of you, there's definitely some questions trying to understand what is the background of the people like yourself who are hiring people kind of for creative roles, as, visual effects artists and editors. And I think there's a little kind of question mark of, someone whose background, are you just kind of human resources, recruitment people, or how much on the ground experience do you have as producers or as artists, and how do those creatives factor into some of these hires? I'm going to start with you, Lara.
Sure. So I started out in production. So I worked for about 15 years as a producer, both of stop motion and visual effects as well. So I moved into this kind of talent field after I'd had a reasonable amount of experience already working in the industry as a producer. So I kind of do come at it from a production point of view, and I'm pretty involved in management of talent as well. Not all recruiters have that background. A lot of people do come from more traditional recruitment backgrounds, which kind of taps into the importance of the reel and resume and its relation to the job description, because that is what a more traditional recruiter will be looking for. I think all three of us have broader experience and probably can see things in people's reels and resumes that maybe traditional recruiters don't have. But in large companies, you're going to have a team of recruiters that may not all come from a visual effects or a creative background. They'll develop an eye. Hiring managers that they work with have that ability to sort of see people's reels and resumes for its creative areas. But it is important just to keep in mind that initial reel and resume presentation just has to be fantastic to get through to the hiring managers who will have potentially a greater understanding of what they're looking for.
Thank you for that. Susan, what advice would you give to an applicant that has a background as in VFX as an artist, supervisor, who's also kind of looking to shift into producer or management production, and executive roles?
I'm sure that Lara and Camille will have some insight into this, but it's my experience that when people know you as person X, sometimes they have a hard time. If you've got many, many years as, say, a flame artist, and you decide that you want to go into product development for applications, people sometimes have a hard time connecting the dots unless you know somebody in product development who knows who you are as a person and what you're capable of doing. And because on paper, a hiring manager will look at that and go, gosh, I don't get it. And pass you by and try and find somebody who's been doing that job, because that's what you usually want when you're looking for someone to work in production management. You want someone who's already doing that. Now, in this case, because it's somebody who has been working in production, again, I guess you just network, you leverage people that you know and people who know you and know what you're capable of doing and know that you are an honorable person and an accountable person who delivers. And you ask them to take a chance on you when the time arrives. But it's just a constant poke, poke, poke. What do you have now?
Thank you. Camille, when you're looking at applicants, and again, I don't know about you personally or what goes through your automated tracking system, how much value does the company attach to having that specific university degree, that film degree, in the selection process versus people who might be self-taught or have different kinds of certifications?
I think mostly, again, the first thing that I look at is the reel. If it's a reel-based job, the resume, if it's a resume-based job. So I'm actually looking at the aesthetic first. I mean, I really want to see if they're matching the skills that are required for the level of the role. That's the first place I'm going to go. And then, I'm going to look at the resume and then any other supplemental material after.
Got it.
Can I just say, Naomi, I thought I'd just say with the college degree thing, the only time that has become important in some international circumstances is if it has an effect on if you're able to get a visa or not, particularly in the US when, sometimes you cannot get a visa unless you have a degree. But I totally agree. I don't look at that. Really, it comes down to the work.
Yeah, and I would also say that if you, this goes a little bit back to the visa question, I think now more than ever, it's really important to put on your resume, if you are a visa holder, what type of visa you're holding, and if you can, the expiration date, because that's going to tell us quite a lot. If you're on a student visa, if you're on a like an OPT that's a STEM, if you have a green card, that's really going to help us with the decision, especially now. And I know we're working virtually, but I think that, to Lara's point, I don't really look at that information unless I know that the person is going to require a visa for the degree, because it's tied to the types of visas depending on whether you're a student or not. But it's going to be very helpful now and going forward, probably until immigration eases up, to know, what is your visa status, regardless of whether it's international or in the US.
Yeah, thank you. We definitely clearly have some college students and, people at the early end of figuring out their career on the call. So there are a couple questions. If any of you have any kind of thoughts on best resources for building visual effects skills, particularly, as a college student. And again, and advice for recent college graduates, looking to break into the industry and get that position that's going to start to give them that actual hands-on experience. You can start, Camille, but I'd love to hear from all of you on some of your advice to people at the early parts of their journey.
I would say networking is key. And again, even though we've gone virtual, there's still so many organizations out there that are having networking opportunities, especially now. There's quite a lot of portfolio reviews online, so you can look at some of the various organizations around and find out what networking events they're having. If they're having portfolio reviews, you might be able to speak with recruiters from certain companies. There's a lot of that going on right now, I've noticed. I would say if you are a recent graduate or even still in school, there are still some companies that are offering intern possibilities virtually. And then there are some companies that have entry-level trainee type or apprentice type roles that it's like you're not quite at the pro level, but you can get in the company at an entry-level position and be mentored. So it's important to look for intern opportunities, to look for apprenticeships or trainee programs with some of the various visual effects or animation companies or TV companies, because they're out there. And then really use the online resources to search for which organizations are still carrying on, like, again, connections, networking, portfolio reviews. These are things that are going to get you screen time now with recruiters or hiring managers.
Anything from your perspective, Susan, in terms of advice for people on that, initial part of their career journey?
Absolutely. So a couple of things. I think that most universities have an outreach department with connections in the local industry so that they can help you pinpoint the where you want to focus your attentions for portfolio reviews and networking and potential internships and entry-level positions. A lot of the larger companies in the US have kind of done away with internships and entry-level positions, as they have partners in other parts of the world that will take on some of that entry-level work. However, games companies almost always have internships, allow 6 months for that to bear fruit, and it's a pretty arduous interview process with tests and lots of meetings, but it's not impossible. The other thing is the more traditional visual effects route, where you decide to go to a studio and you start as a runner and you get the lay of the land and you learn where all the bodies are buried, and people have conversations in runners that you pick up intel about how a project is going, and then eventually after a year or so you rise up through the ranks, you find a mentor internally in the studio, you take advantage of tutorials and the tools that the studio has to offer and teach yourself in your off hours. That's a more traditional route to go in. It's a lot scrappier. It's not as corporately ordained internship kind of thing. I think it just depends on the personality and where you want to focus your professional attentions.
Thanks. Anything you want to share from your vantage point, Lara?
Everything everyone just said is exactly what I would be advising. The only things perhaps to add is think broad about the type of companies that you might want to be creating relationships with. Of course, the very large established companies, ILM will be doing Jedi Academies in most of our locations once we're back in the studio and that's able to be done. Keep a lookout for internships, but don't forget to look at maybe the smaller companies. There might be a small motion graphics company that is really open to having an intern or has some freelance opportunities for you. Look at your skill set and keep working on your reel in your spare time. There's just so much self-learning that you can do out there, as well as just honing in on those aesthetic pieces that will really make your creativity shine. And do keep researching into areas of the industry that are starting to become quite interesting. Real-time, for example, we haven't touched much on that, but virtual production and real-time technology is starting to become a very important part of visual effects and other areas, VR, AR, and there's a lot that you can do to just try and do some research and get up to speed with where those new technologies are taking us, it will present you as a more rounded individual. And I think thinking broad about your skill set, while at the same time developing an idea of where you'd like to be is a good idea, and might just broaden the chance of you being able to get your foot in the door, which is ultimately what you want to do. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you do end up taking a traineeship that isn't exactly in the area that you want, your career will be really long. And, you know, I sound very old, but after however many years it is, 25 years, you just never know where you'll end up. So just do keep thinking broadly about what you might want to do, and take any opportunity that you have to work or have an internship, and create those relationships that you will have and will keep with you throughout your whole career.
Thank you for that. Susan, I think you mentioned something, you know, at the very beginning. We were talking about LinkedIn, for example, in terms of how people present. But you know, often we see companies and recruiters, you know, using LinkedIn, and I think there's some interest in what's the best approach to networking with companies and recruiters using LinkedIn. And do recruiters generally find it acceptable for aspiring artists and applicants to request to connect with them through that platform? What's your take on that?
Well, because I'm sort of mercenary and I work for hire, I basically will connect with almost anyone and get to know them, because my network is my currency, truthfully. I can't speak for Lara and Camille, but I would presume that they probably keep a lower profile, because otherwise they would be inundated. But because I'm always hunting, I only once have had someone link into me and tell me that I had a beautiful smile and he knew it wasn't a dating site, but was I married? That was a little weird, and I unfriended that guy. I was looking for pipeline guys for a small studio, and this guy was a pipeline guy in oil in Texas, and I think that we just like them. Anyway, so yes, I link into everyone, but again, it's my story is just a slightly bit different. I would think that in sort of Lara and Camille's situation, it's probably better to link into and make a connection to somebody internally who might be able to look at your work and mentor you, and drop a word in the recruiter's ear, and then make sure that you apply online so that you don't get lost.
No, I accept anyone pretty much.
Right.
I mean, look, I mean, at recruiters, it's not, I mean, of course we rely a lot on our candidates applying, but actually the best way to find the best people is to actually have had those connections. And I do try to answer any messages that people send me. I'm sorry if I haven't. We do get a lot of messages, and sometimes I can't always answer every question, but I really love hearing from people, and I don't mind at all people reaching out to me. Camille, how are you on that front?
I'm just like you. I mean, I am on LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn. I love I actually love giving people my LinkedIn account when I do go out or when I'm emailing them, because I may not be able to get to it in a timely manner because I'm reading all the other, 500 emails that I get a day. But I do try to spend some time to follow up. And it also helps me not just keep in touch with new people who LinkedIn, but I also can keep tabs on people that I've had relationships with for years. And I can reach out and say, hey, what are you doing? We have this position coming up. Are you still interested? So it works on both fronts for me. And for me, it's kind of like in my utility belt, and I use it weekly, if not, every other day. But it just may take me a while to respond back, because you do get a lot of requests, but I do like to keep track.
It's funny, I taught a class at Nomon to some, it was like a reel and resume preparedness class. And we spent a good 30 minutes just kind of tearing apart a LinkedIn profile, what makes a good one, what makes a robust one, what you want to put on, what's professional, the headshot and whatnot. And then the next class, I pointed out 3 of the students and said, you guys all get extra credit because right after the class, you linked into me. And no one else did. And everyone's like, oh, what do you mean? You should have done that. Absolutely. You meet someone, you link into them, you never know. And then you just follow their posts and see what kinds of things they're up to. And another thing I learned recently is whenever I go on LinkedIn, I always try to find 3 or 4 bits of news and say something positive. Congratulations. Oh my gosh, that's beautiful work. Oh, wait, you got your dream job. That's great. Let's catch up. Just so that you are engaged with your network and it's not just passive, and you're passing the positivity along and you're showing appreciation for everyone's successes. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also want to add, really use LinkedIn as your tool, because we're looking at it, but remember, some of the bigger companies have sourcers and their job is literally to be on LinkedIn all day looking for you. So if you're looking, that should be in your, that first sentence of, I am available and I am interested in, tell us what you're looking for. Because I can't tell you how many companies actually have paid sourcers that are going through LinkedIn, looking for you.
Thank you. Let me just throw a couple questions and then we'll probably wrap up in a couple minutes. For people who are looking for freelance work as opposed to applying for, a full-time position, are there any kind of, tools of wisdom here in terms of people making themselves most attractive for those jobs or pathways to find freelance gigs? Anyone have comments on that?
I think you have to, that goes back to the research question, because not all companies offer freelance opportunities. At Nickelodeon, we do. And, I think for the freelancers, we would be looking for the same skills we would be looking for as a full-time hire. Again, use LinkedIn, let us know you're available, reach out to recruiters, reach out to people within the company. But I think as well with us working virtually, anyone who's out of state right now, we are able to hire them on a freelance basis. So I think it's understanding the company that you're interested in if they have freelance opportunities.
Thank you. So before we kind of come to a close, we do like to keep this real. This is VFX Pros Home Edition. So Lara, you can go first. So in this kind of, let's call it new normal, or these times we find ourselves in, for you, and you can say personally or professionally, what's been the hardest in terms of adapting to this new way of working? And also what's been the most freeing? And are there things you think you'd like to kind of keep, new ways of working that you think you'll continue once this work from home period, ends at some point?
So one of the things that's quite hard is you might hear that the dog is scratching at the door and nipping at the door, and I have 2 kids as well, and so some of the working environments, meetings where you're at home and there's stuff going on in the background, has been, on the one hand, quite challenging, and on the other hand, a bit of a joy. I was in a daily session yesterday, and one of our compositors was presenting a shot, and his 2-year-old was downstairs saying, "Dad, Dad, Dad, Dad," and he just kept presenting, and then there was this really sweet moment where he said, "That's Bruno. He really wants me to come downstairs." And I think there was something, as a mum, that was really lovely, because there was actually, a group of people all kind of very warmly responding to this young dad who was working and juggling a whole heap of things. And I think the reminder for all of us that we all have amazing careers and commitment to our work, but at the same time we have parents, we have kids, we have dogs, we have hobbies, and somehow getting that work-life balance to work is something I think that in the future we're all going to want to make work, and that's what I look forward to, I think. I do look forward to getting back into the office though, and if I could have 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, that would be ideal. Who knows how it's going to work out, but I do think that the opportunity is there to create a new normal, which is a bit of a blend of ISO and working in the office, but enabling our lives to remain a little blurred and to have that work-life balance just a little bit better for everybody. So yeah, that's where I'm at the moment. I'm sorry for my dog.
No, that's great. So Camille, I'm going to ask you the same question in terms of what's been what's been the most challenging and also the most freeing about this situation, and is there anything you're going to want to retain when things, you know, maybe pivot back a little bit?
Yeah, I'm gonna echo Lara. And you know, before all of this, I would be at work, and I'm a mom as well. And I would always say, I'm going home to my full-time job, because being a parent is a full-time job. Now with this situation, and I have 2 dogs and as well, but it is that blur between, you know, now everything is happening in one space. And I think, you know, that the challenges have been making time for myself. And you know, the workday is now even more exhausting, because you're sitting at your desk for hours on end, whereas before you would get up and you would walk to meetings, and now you literally just click into your meeting after meeting after meeting, you know. So for me, I have started to, it's done 2 things for me. It's really changed how I communicate, because as well, you can lose things because you don't have body language anymore. So I realized I need to find out how other people need to be communicated to, where you don't have that body language. So it's made me be, hopefully, a more effective communicator. And then it's also made me look at carving out time for myself, because I realize, you know, these calls are exhausting. I've tried to put in, literally, I'll plan out my week, and I will block out time where I just get up and walk around, or read a book, or do a puzzle or something, just to, you know, make sure that I'm moving. And then going forward, you know, what I miss is people, just seeing people and talking to people. And even if I'm not saying anything, just being around people, I do miss that. So I do look forward to when we can all work again. But just like Lara, I hope that we can have a balance, because I never actually really believed in the word work-life balance, because they're just completely, you know, work and balance don't usually equate. So I hope that we can have that blurred line, where now I think what this pandemic has done is really shown that you can work from home, you can work remotely as well as in the office. And I do hope, again, just like Laura, that it can continue in a way where, you know, it's like when we come home, we can work, but we won't have that, the schedule that we do now.
Thank you. Okay, Susan, keep it real. Let's bring it home. Tell me about you, hardest and most freeing, and how that's been for you.
So I've been working from home for about 5 years. And the difference now is that everyone works from home. So I've had to go from working from home with very set work hours and even a set workspace to being able to work in and around homeschooling, making 3 meals a day for 4 people, the endless dishes, to make things even more surreal. I broke my ankle in December and was unable to put weight on my left leg until February. So I've been doing virtual physical therapy twice a week. And it's just been a very strange year. One of the first things that I did when this pandemic hit was get every red shirt I own out of my closet and put it in a donate pile. I don't want to go anywhere in a red shirt right now. It just feels too surreal. It's like the Recce team always gets offed with their red shirts. We used to use the terms work-life balance a lot, and I feel like it's really become more of a work-life integration, especially because it is my own office. And now I work from the kitchen table, or right now I'm working from the family room. My son's doing Zoom karate in the next room. My daughter just went out for a bike ride with her friends, and we have 3 cats and a dog. And what I miss about getting back to normal is I will never, ever, ever take for granted someone saying, "Hey, Susan, let's go catch a cup of coffee, catch up in person." I really miss that. By the end of the day, when someone says, "Hey, let's have a Zoom cocktail hour," I'm like, I'm done with screens. I'm going to pick up a paper book, or I'm going to sketch, or I'm going to play a board game with my children. I'm going to try not to look at my phone. I definitely have a lot of screen fatigue, and my heart goes out to artists who use the screen all day for what they do. And then for relaxation, you know, do you want to watch a movie? You're kind of done with the blue light. So that's it.
Well, I have to tell you that from all the people who've been tuning in, both on Zoom and Facebook Live, there is enormous thanks for your insights, folks who really are finding this so valuable with such really good, practical, tangible information. So I am going to get us to the point where I'm going to say thank you, Camille, Lara, and Susan, for taking time to kind of give us your insights, you know, as professionals, but also, you know, like I said, keeping it real, just as people kind of going through this from home. And I also want to thank everyone, the many people who joined us today for this episode, excuse me, of VFX Pros Home Edition on Retooling Your Career. We will have the replay link of this session up on the VES website and on our social media channels soon. And if you enjoyed this, we do have a lot more webcasts coming down the pike, so please stay tuned on our website and our social media. We'll be announcing a whole nother slew of great conversations like this to hopefully keep people educated and informed and tethered and maybe entertained as well. So thank you again, everybody. And I'm going to just say that's a wrap. Take good care.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, VES. And thank you, Lara and Camille. I learned a lot from you guys.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's good to see you both again.
Yes.
Hopefully in person next time.
Yeah, next time we're going to have a drink.
Love it.
All right. We'll see you all again soon.
Bye.
Thank you.